Hello, everyone, and welcome to the debrief on ABC News Live. I'm Kimberly Brooks. Thanks so much for joining us today. Some dangerous wildfires sweeping through California, so we have the latest there, plus new developments in the Trump impeachment investigations and new damning allegations against former NBC anchor Matt Lauer. But first, here are your headlines.
For the first time since the grounding of the 737 MAX jets, an airline is now declaring a date when it expects them to fly again. ABC's Alex Stone.
American Airlines announcing it plans to begin flying the Boeing 737 MAX again on January 16th. It's the first time an airline has given a specific date. Until now, dates have been general and fluid. American notifying Wall Street it intends to fly the grounded plane again on that day. American Airlines expects 2 software upgrades to be approved by the FAA before the end of the year.
The striking moment was caught on a Ring camera. Watch again as the local power company's truck in Long Beach, California tips over and that crane collapses right between 2 homes, hitting them on the way down. It all happened as a contractor was replacing overhead lines. You can see workers rushing to the truck, hoping to help anyone in need. Falling debris hit Carl Krominga. He spent the night in the hospital getting stitches on the back of his head.
I didn't know if it was one of the telephone poles, if the crane had come down or what. All I could see was that the roof of my patio had collapsed and missed crushing me.
Next year could be a big one for gamers. Sony now says its next-generation console, the PlayStation 5, will arrive for the 2020 holiday season. Video games, Sony's most profitable business.
We begin with breaking news out of Germany, where at least 2 people have been killed in a shooting near a synagogue in the city of Halle. This comes on Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish faith. So I want to bring in Julia McFarland in our London bureau with the latest. Julia, just have to ask you, what do we know so far? What's happened?
Hey, Kimberly, exactly just as you say. Police gave a police update earlier this morning, confirming the news that 2 people have died so far and that they have arrested 1 person. They are continuing the search. They've recently made an appeal for any information or any photos that people may have. A regional mayor says that 2 people were seen on a highway heading for Munich following reports of gunfire. Now, there's been dramatic footage, as you can see right now, of a heavily armed man firing a long-barreled weapon from behind a car. Witnesses have been telling German media that they saw a hand grenade being launched in the city of Halle and that the attack happened near a synagogue. Now, it's important to note, of course, that this is happening on Yom Kippur. It is the holiest day on the Jewish calendar. The head of the Jewish community in Halle, he told Der Spiegel, a German newspaper, that there were dozens of people inside the synagogue at the time and that 2 gunmen were struggling with the synagogue's security personnel and didn't manage to get outside, and that there were also further reports of gunfire around about the area. That area has now been completely locked down. The train station has been closed, as I say, as police continue their search.
All right. And just before we go, are they considering this a religious attack?
So the police have handed over the investigation to federal prosecutors. Now, federal prosecutors in Germany, they tend to look after cases involving national security or terrorism. It's not yet been labeled as a domestic or a religious attack or domestic terrorism yet. Police initially described this as a rampage situation, but it is being investigated. And as I say, police are still appealing to people for further evidence if they have any information about what took place.
All right, Julia McFarland right there in our London bureau with the updates. Thank you so much. And guys, we move on to California with parts of the state under extreme wildfire danger over the next 3 days. A wildfire in Mariposa County has already burned 2,000 acres. It's a threat so bad that the electric company PG&E has proactively shut the power off to nearly 800,000 residents. So I want to bring in Will Carr, who's on the ground there. Will, this is pretty incredible. Do we know if meteorologists have an idea of where these wildfires will be?
Well, Kimberly, we're in a red flag warning across this region for the next couple of days, so there's no exact idea where a wildfire could break out, but there's no doubt that this is a historic move by PG&E. Now, this is a reaction to all the wildfires that we've had here in California in recent years. Dozens of fires have been started by downed power lines. PG&E filed for bankruptcy earlier this year. They were also responsible for the Paradise Fire. You'll remember that here in California last year that killed 86 people. So this is a reaction to that. They've decided to shut off power for hundreds of thousands of people across California over the next couple of days. Now, one big frustration just this morning is that if you go onto the PG&E website and try to figure out exactly where the power outages are, you don't really see anything right there. According to this, there are no power outages, but we know that's not the case because here in Sausalito, you can see this entire block is without power. You can see the traffic lights are flashing here. There's concerns across this area about people who need medical help. Dialysis clinics have shut down. This school right here is actually still open, but they don't have any power. I just spoke to some of the teachers. They told me they're going to go old school today. They actually have to pull out some of the physical books that they haven't been using in recent years because they teach on their iPads. They're going to have to teach the students who show up, about 40 teenagers who are going to be here a little bit later. And then across the street, there's a dentist office. Laura and Becky here work at that dentist office, and they showed up today. There's no power, so tell me, Laura, what your plan is for the day.
Our plan is to try to be available to all of our patients. We have a full schedule, and we were concerned that they wouldn't know that we can't take them in today.
And Becky, there's been widespread news coverage the last 24 hours that these power outages could happen. Did you expect that this would happen at your office? And, you know, what's going through your mind right now?
Well, it's a little hard not to know exactly where the outage is going to be. At my house, everything was working fine, but apparently it's going to be shut down soon, so I'm a little worried about that. I tried going to the website, but it was not working correctly, so it was kind of hard to determine where the outage was going to be.
So you're facing a double impact from all of this. And how, as a hygienist, would you possibly work on patients with no power today?
It's really hard because we really care about our patients, so we really want to take good care of them. So it's really hard not to have the power to clean their teeth and fix what they need.
And Laura, as you know, we've had so many wildfires here in recent years. On a scale of 1 to 10, what's your frustration level without having the power at your office versus knowing that this is a proactive measure to try to prevent the next wildfire?
Well, we understand that they're doing what they have to do in a way, but trying to find out information has been the most frustrating, so we really don't know day to day how we're going to plan. So we're taking it for today. We'll see what tomorrow brings and make the most of it and take care of our patients.
And Becky, you mentioned that frustration as well, just trying to get on the website and trying to figure out exactly where these power outages are, how long it's going to affect you. It's got to be quite frustrating.
It is very frustrating, and hopefully it's not as frustrating for everybody, but best of wishes for everybody out there.
So you guys are sticking it out in your office today. If patients show up, you're going to try to make the best of it.
Yes.
All right.
It's our hope.
Thank you, ladies, so much.
you.
We really appreciate it. And Kimberly, we're hearing a lot of that frustration from people in the area. We're in a coffee shop not too long ago, and this is all that people are talking about right now is exactly what they're going to do. We've seen people in the last 24 hours flock to hardware stores, flock to supermarkets. They've loaded up on food and water, and people have been buying generators. In fact, there's a restaurant and coffee shop across the street that doesn't have power. We saw them taking a generator in a little bit earlier today. And the big news, too, is that the strongest winds, which we're not feeling any right now, but they're going to be going on throughout the course of the day, and the strongest ones are actually going to come overnight. So we have to get through this over the next 24 hours. And then PG&E says that they actually will have to go mile by mile looking at all the power lines before they can turn the power back on across this region. So this entire area could be without power for a number of days. Kimberly.
Thank you, Will. Yeah, frustrating in more ways than one. We appreciate those updates. And now I want to go to our chief meteorologist, Ginger Zee, because she's actually using AR to show how dangerous these wildfire winds are. So, Ginger?
Let's go ahead and focus in on how this is all going to work. We've had this new tool, the augmented reality, that's perfect for an example like this. Let's pop California up, dive in a little bit, because it's not just the Bay Area, but as he was just explaining, the offshore winds begin really by tomorrow, and they're the worst of it. So let's fly in a little closer. The San Gabriel, the Santa Ana, and you can see the winds coming over all of these. This is actually how the Santa Ana wind works. The compression of air when they come down the mountain slopes heats it up. We've got humidity less than 10%. You could see wind gusts of 55 to 70 miles per hour. This is why tomorrow night through really early Saturday morning, this is going to be extreme fire danger for Southern California.
All right, Ginger, thanks for breaking that down. And guys, we're going to move on to Washington, where the White House sent a letter to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi yesterday regarding the impeachment proceedings, saying that given the inquiry lacks any legitimate constitutional foundation, the executive branch cannot be expected to participate in it. And this comes after the State Department stopped the U.S. ambassador to the EU, Gordon Sondland, from testifying before the House yesterday. So as a reminder, the impeachment inquiry investigations all stem from a July 25th call where a whistleblower alleges President Trump asked the president of Ukraine to dig up dirt on Joe Biden and his son, and says that the president was holding $400 million worth of aid as leverage. So things have moved pretty fast since then. And I want to bring in Karen Travers at the White House. Karen, I just want to start with this White House letter first. They are criticizing the process. What's the impact of that? It's kind of shifting the narrative.
Yeah, I think it certainly did. I spent a long morning on ABC News Radio today talking to anchors across the station, and all of the questions were focused on the impeachment inquiry process, not the substance that is at the heart of this. Didn't talk about the complaint, didn't talk about the phone call with the president of Ukraine, but instead you have the White House putting out this 8-page letter calling this inquiry, the process here, illegitimate, calling it partisan, and drawing a really strong line here, saying that the White House is not going to cooperate. So that's what people were focused on today. And I think if the White House is hoping to shift the spotlight away from what the House Democrats are saying the president did in that phone call and how the administration handled the phone call after that, and shift it more to how Democrats are now conducting this, I think they succeeded today.
So I want to ask you, even though the narrative is shifting, what are the new developments in regards to the complaint? The substance.
Well, ABC News reported yesterday that the whistleblower wrote a 2-page memo that was later turned over to the Inspector General of the intelligence community. And in that memo, the whistleblower is basing this on a conversation that they had with somebody who had firsthand information, somebody who listened in on the president's phone call this summer with the president of Ukraine. This official, according to the whistleblower, described it as crazy and frightening and said it was completely lacking in substance relating to national security.
All right, and just before we go, there's also news that Rudy Giuliani might be testifying before the House as well.
Well, he is saying that he's not going to go before committee as long as Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff is leading the House Intelligence Committee. This is according to the Washington Post, who talked to Giuliani. And, you know, he's said this before, too. Adam Schiff is not going anywhere at this point, but I think it's certainly Rudy Giuliani trying to say he doesn't want to play by the current apparatus and play by the current rules. There was talk about him going over to the Senate side. Lindsey Graham, close ally of the president, of course, saying they'd like to bring Giuliani up and ask him some questions. Bit of a sidetrack, I think, maybe a little bit of a distraction there, because, of course, it's the House that's moving forward on this impeachment inquiry.
All right. Karen Travers right there at the White House with the latest. Thank you so much. And we're going to move overseas to Syria and the president's shifting tone on his move to withdraw U.S. troops to allow Turkey to attack the Kurds. A reminder, Turkey considers the Kurds to be a terror group, but the U.S. has worked closely with the Kurds to fight ISIS. So it's a move that has received a lot of backlash from both Republicans and Democrats because of its potentially dangerous consequences. So I want to bring in Connor Finnegan at the State Department. Connor, I just want to ask you, what's the latest? What's happening there today?
Kimberly, Turkish warplanes are in the skies over northeastern Syria right now. This Turkish offensive has begun. President Erdogan of Turkey announcing it a short time ago on Twitter that they were beginning to conduct airstrikes against what they consider to be terrorists. Again, as you said, these are Kurdish forces that the U.S. has long worked with in the fight against ISIS, that the U.S. does not consider terrorists. In the presence of U.S. troops on the ground with these Kurdish forces is what had kept Turkey at bay for so long. But after Sunday night's call between President Trump and President Erdogan, the U.S. began to move back some small attachments of U.S. troops and really give a green light for Turkey to move ahead. And now Turkish forces have begun those attacks. President Trump, importantly, has threatened to, destroy Turkey's economy if they conduct this attack. But he said on Twitter a short time ago that this fighting between various groups in the Middle East has been going on for years, and that the USA should never have been in the Middle East. Ending stupid, endless wars for us, he said, are going to end soon.
Yeah, so Connor, what's the impact of the president going back and forth saying, I'm going to obliterate the Turkish economy, but then also inviting the Turkish president to the White House? What does it mean when he goes back and forth like this?
I think it's having a very strong impact on a lot of countries and forces in the region. They see this waffling back and forth by President Trump as really a sign that the U.S. is not as committed to the Middle East as it once was. We've seen other countries take advantage of that. Russia has moved further into Syria, Iran further into Syria, and of course there's also the impact on the Kurdish allies themselves. Again, this is a fighting force that lost over 11,000 people in the fight against ISIS. Really served as the ground forces for U.S. airstrikes against the terror group, and they're now being abandoned by American forces. I think that there's also a strong concern that this could actually give ISIS a new opportunity. There are, 10,000 ISIS fighters in camps that are being guarded by these Kurdish forces right now, and there's a real risk that because of this Turkish offensive, they'll have to move guards to fight Turkey, and it could create a greater risk of jailbreaks among these ISIS camps. There's also, of course, the threat of displacement. There are, warnings that up to 300,000 people could be displaced by this fighting, moving into Turkey, or, larger refugee flows into Europe, and really destabilizing those countries in the same way that we've seen for years now.
Yeah, so there's severe consequences. One thing I want to ask you, just for people, in case they don't know, why is there a Turkish incursion happening right now? What's the basis for this?
Well, this is actually something that President Erdogan of Turkey has long sought. He believes that these Kurdish forces have connections to terror groups across the border in Turkey. There's a group there known as the PKK, which the U.S. considers to be a terrorist force, along, of course, with Turkey. And they've been battling the PKK for years now. They see these Kurdish forces across the border in Syria as basically an extension of the PKK, and they're targeting these groups, they say, because they want to rid the world of terrorism. But again, these are forces that the U.S. has worked with, that the U.S. has armed, and that the U.S. does not consider terrorists. Instead, they've really been the linchpin in this fight against terrorism and against ISIS.
All right, and before we go, so what actually happens next?
There's great concern, again, about the fighting, creating mass flows of refugees, of potentially creating an opportunity here for ISIS. I think not just the risk of these jailbreaks among camps that the Kurdish forces had been guarding, but also just the chaos, the political instability that comes with this offensive. We're actually watching across the border in Iraq, there are mass protests this week that have killed over 100 people. The political instability in both of these countries could give ISIS an opportunity to resurge in a way that the Pentagon actually warned about in August. They said that ISIS is taking advantage of the sort of the drawback by U.S. forces and of the instability, and that it's something that the world needs to be watching.
All right, and we are Connor Finnegan right there at the State Department. Thank you so much. And now we turn to new allegations against former NBC anchor Matt Lauer, with Variety reporting on an excerpt from Ronan Farrow's new book, Catch and Kill, which details an on-the-record accusation of rape against Lauer. This comes from a producer who worked with him at the Sochi Olympics in 2014. That producer coming forward in Farrow's new book with detailed claims of how the alleged assault happened while she was traveling on assignment. So our Eva Pilgrim has a story.
Ronan Farrow's new book, Catch and Kill, which details his investigation into Harvey Weinstein, as well as his attempts to get his then employer, NBC News, to broadcast the story. Now, new allegations surfacing about former Today Show anchor Matt Lauer, who was fired from NBC in 2017 for alleged sexual misconduct. According to Variety, which obtained excerpts from the book, a former NBC News producer who worked with Meredith Vieira has come forward identifying herself in Farrow's book and stating that Lauer sexually assaulted her at the 2014 Sochi Olympics. According to the woman's account in Catch and Kill, Lauer joined her and Vieira for drinks, and she ended up going back to Lauer's room twice. Once to retrieve her press credential and another because he invited her back to the room. Once in the hotel room, the woman says Lauer, who was wearing a t-shirt and boxers, pushed her against the door and kissed her, then pushed her onto the bed. According to the Variety excerpts from the book, she said she was in the midst of telling him no when he just did it. It hurt so bad. I remember thinking, is this normal? The woman telling Farrow it was non-consensual in the sense that I was too drunk to consent. It was non-consensual in that I said multiple times that I didn't want to. Back in New York City, according to the excerpts, the woman told Farrow she went on to have further sexual encounters with Lauer that were consensual. After the encounter, according to Catch and Kill, Farrow says she told colleagues and superiors at NBC, but nothing happened until she went to Meredith Vieira and told her what happened. Vieira urged her to go to NBC Human Resources with a lawyer. When contacted by Variety, neither NBC News nor Lauer had a comment, but Lauer has previously said, I fully acknowledge that I acted inappropriately as a husband, father, and principal at NBC. However, I want to make it perfectly clear that any allegations or reports of coercive, aggressive, or abusive actions on my part at any time are absolutely false.
All right, so this book also represents Farrow's account of his investigation into Harvey Weinstein and his efforts to get that story on the air at NBC. So eventually, he had to take the story to a magazine to get it published. Now, NBC has released a statement in response to the Variety article saying Matt Lauer's conduct was appalling, horrific, and reprehensible, as we said at the time. That's why he was fired within 24 hours of us first learning of the complaint. Our hearts break again for our colleague. And we're also hearing from Matt Lauer in a letter sent to Variety responding to this. He writes, I had an extramarital affair in 2014. It began when she came to my hotel room very late one night in Sochi, Russia. We engaged in a variety of sexual acts. Each act was mutual and completely consensual. She was a fully enthusiastic and willing partner. At no time did she behave in a way that made it appear she was incapable of consent. This encounter, which she now falsely claims was an assault, was the beginning of our affair. It was the first of many sexual encounters between us over the next several months. At no time during or after her multiple visits to my apartment did she express in words or actions any discomfort with being there or with our affair. Pretty interesting there. So guys, we're going to move on. We move on to the 2020 race. And as you know, there was a significant development last week with Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders suffering a heart attack. Now he's off the trail and resting until next week's Democratic debate. So I want to bring in Adam Kelsey, who's been covering the Sanders campaign. Adam, it's good to see you. And I just have to ask you, how is he doing?
Good morning, Kimberly. Well, 1 week after suffering that heart attack, Senator Bernie Sanders tells us that he is feeling very good. He doesn't feel any lingering effects from that heart attack, in which he had to have 2 stents inserted into his heart. He visited a cardiologist yesterday, telling us upon his return that there was nothing out of the ordinary in his tests, that, like I said, he needs some time to rest and recuperate, but he's feeling very good, feeling a lot stronger than he was in the weeks leading up to this heart attack. Admitted that he was a little bit more fatigued on the trail than usual, but is starting to eye next week's Democratic primary debate and then the future of his campaign after this heart attack.
Adam, I think we all forget how rigorous and demanding these schedules can be. So how will he adjust his travel and his schedule because of this?
Right, and particularly rigorous for somebody like Bernie Sanders, who regularly packs 4 or 5 events into one day. I was actually with him in Iowa a couple weeks ago. We traveled 300 miles in one day. He had 4 different rallies. So he's somebody who's been holding more events and more of these town halls and discussions with voters than other candidates. But he told us yesterday that that's something he thinks he is going to scale back. He's readjusting his campaign strategy going forward. But again, I should note that a readjustment for Bernie Sanders is a little bit different than a readjustment for another candidate. For him, a slow day might be 2 or 3 events. So we're certainly going to see him out and about in all of these early states, Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, just as much as the other candidates, but perhaps not as much as we used to see him in the past.
And do you think this will impact how voters see his readiness to lead?
Well, he was already the oldest candidate in this Democratic field. Joe Biden right behind him at 77 years of age. Sanders is 78. Elizabeth Warren, 70 years old as well. So it might not just be something that's focused on Sanders alone. Voters are going to have to reconcile whether or not, when talking about a shift in the White House, whether it's a generational shift as well, or whether they want to vote somebody into office who is of advanced age, like I talked about. And Sanders himself kind of admitted this when he spoke to us yesterday. He said that voters are certainly going to have it at the top of their minds, but he was hoping that they're going to look at the totality of his career, how consistent he's been for decades now as a elected official, and not just this recent health scare.
And before we go, I mean, on top of all of this, we learned, as you know, that his daughter-in-law passed away.
Yeah, very suddenly a sad story up here. The Sanders family told us yesterday that Levi Sanders, Bernie's son, his wife, Renee, had passed away. She was diagnosed with cancer just last week, and then a few days later, she tragically died. So the family, a tight-knit group, regularly out on the trail with Senator Bernie Sanders. You see his children, his grandchildren all together. They are certainly in mourning right now, just an extra kind of layer of difficulty that Sanders is dealing with as he gets ready to head back on the trail.
Yeah, incredibly sad, but we are happy that he is doing well. So Adam Kelsey right there in Vermont, thank you so much. And guys, everyone has their ways of dealing with stress. Maybe you do yoga, maybe you box. But before we go, I want to show you how the Philadelphia Flyers, this hockey team, what they're doing for their fans. They have the first ever rage room inside a major professional sports arena. So what does that mean? You see it here. It's a room where fans can go and release anger by smashing household items like a flat screen, a television, a table, all using hockey sticks. So pretty crazy. Some wild fans there. And I guess I would say definitely don't try this at home. Oh, my goodness. All right, guys, continue to take care of yourselves. And if you're around, you can stick around for the briefing room at 3:30 p.m. And then you can check out World News Prime at 8 p.m. And if you want to stay updated on all of these headlines, you can go to abcnews.com or download the app. I'm Kimberly Brooks, and I'll see you tomorrow.